Good morning, Rabbi Isai. Rabbi Isai, here we go, 10 lines from the bottom of Daf Nun Hayom Beis. So we're discussing a gluda. A gluda is an animal which is missing all of its skin. Omarav, kola or kuloi matzah begluda. If you have one little cell the size of a coin of skin somewhere on the animal, it saves the glue is coming up soon, based on process. So, chotz ma'or based on process. This is or based on process. The skin on the bottom part of an animal's leg, that will not save the animal. That's a treifa. Over there's no meat at all. Rabbi Yochanan says that even the skin of Beis HaProzos could save the animal from being a treifa as long as there's a sela. Rabbi Yochanan wants or Beis HaProzos mao, exactly what we discussed. There's a kazais of skin on the lower part of the leg. Yes, it does in fact save the animal. But you taught us once, when it comes to tumah, so typically speaking, the hide is not metama. But if it acts like meat, then it is. But it says that the hide is more like meat and not like hide. Therefore, it won't save an animal. It's as if he doesn't have any hide. He only has meat. And one of them is or Beis HaProzos. So you see that of the lower leg is not good skin. Al takniteni, don't upset me. So that's das yachid, the sanya. That's an individual shita. We don't hold like him. The sanya. Hashoichet sa'ila lahaktir kizayis ma'or shetachas ha'alya chutzim koimoi and chutzim zmanoi. So we know we're not going to go into don't worry about it if you don't enjoy Pigel stuff, even though we learned Zvachim and everybody's very familiar with it. But just in case, it's just is brought in there as a side point. The idea is that if a kohen, as he's shechting an animal, he thinks to himself a thought that's passels this animal or creates a karas. How? By thinking that he's going to eat this animal in 3-4 days from now, when in fact you can only eat it 1 or 2 days. Or he's going to put it on the mizbech in 1 or 2 days from now, instead of putting it on today. So if he thinks to put it on in a different place, outside the Beis HaMikdash, in Tzfat, Tveria, some place other than Beis HaMikdash, that's chutz l'makom. So that you never get cars for that, but it makes the animal apostle. So too, if he thought to put on the mizbech when it comes to an oila, so an oila is something that you can't eat yourself. So all his thoughts are when he's putting it on the mizbeach, and what is he thinking about? The hide that's under the tail of a sheep. So it works. Chutzim koimoi, pasavim v'kares. Chutzim zman, if you thought about it outside of it a lot of time, pigul v'chayim of kares, you get kares. Eliezer ben Yehuda ish ivlim omar mishum Yaakov v'chenoi b'shim ben Yehuda ish ikus oimer mishum b'shimin. And the hide on the head of a calf that's still nursing, and the hide that's under the tail. And all those that when it comes to tumah, we said that the hides are like the meat, la'avi, or beis haboishes, the female womb entrance. So Taisus in Zvachim asks, we're not talking about a female here, we're talking about a male because the oil can only be a male. So he says, it's the same area by a male. The bottom line is that you see that it's a das yachid that says that the hide that's on the lower part of the leg is matrif, that's not considered, it's considered basar, but most of the chacham hold that it's considered hide and therefore it's machshir the animal. Says the Mishnah. Now we're moving on to a new topic. We're done for now with the treifas of an animal. Now we're moving on to birds, chickens, Very, very geschmackes sugya. Veilu treifetz boiv. These create a treif and a bird. Oh, I was just in my room and I forgot to bring my kana. No. Nekuvas haveshet. If there's a hole in the esophagus, upsukas hagargeres, and if there's a split in the kana, which is the trachea, the breathing tube, it's just like an animal. A small little puncture wound in the eating tube makes it a treif, but by the trachea, you need more than that. You need a split. Oh, here it becomes gishmak. Hikata chulda al roisha. If a weasel, a chulda could be a rat, but we don't like talking about rats. Let's call it a weasel. It's gishmak when it's a weasel. So, when a weasel punctures its head, mokim shah isa treifa, in a place that it creates a treifa. So let me show you a couple of videos. First, we have the real thing. First of all, what's a weasel? Weasels looks like a little bit like a mongoose. They have them also in Eretz Yisrael. It's a feisty little animal. This is better. We got a much better one. MDY caught this on film. This mamish the Gemara caught it in its head, but now the chicken is still alive, and we want to know if it's a treif or not. So the question of the sugya is: did the teeth of the weasel go through the skull into the brain? Now we know the brain is surrounded by two membranes. Did it puncture both of them? What's fascinating about this Gemara is the Gemara is going to give us all sorts of different ways to check whether or not there's a puncture wound. So says the Mishnah, Nika vakurkavan, the gizzard. So let's take a look at some of the fascinating innards of a bird. So first, when the bird eats food, it goes first into the crop, known as the zepek. From there, it moves into the kurkavan, to the gizzard. And somehow after that, it makes it into the intestines, to the dakin, which we're also going to speak about today. We're going to talk about the kaved and the lave. You see, the liver and the heart are in the front of the chicken. So let's say if it burns its stomach, it's going to burn the heart and the liver. So that's the next thing in the Gemara, in the Mishnah. Nafla la'ur, if a chicken fell into the fire for a moment, but was saved, v'nechmeru b'nei me'ah, and the innards were scorched. Like that. Oh, mama's like that. So the Mishnah goes on to say, if it changed colors, so says the Mishnah, so what do you do if the chicken fell into a flame? Im yirukim psulim. If the red organs turned green, pasul. Im adumim ksherim. And if they remain red, then it's kosher. Drasa. If a human being stepped on a chicken, or utrafa b'koisel, or threw it up against the wall, or another animal broke it up, and it's like struggling to live, it's thrashing around. The concern over here is something called risuk evarim. We had it a number of times, nefula, where the innards might be broken because it had a very, somebody stepped on it, or somebody threw it into a wall. But the halacha is that if the animal survives 24 hours, it waited around for 24 hours, ushchata, and then you shechted it, ksheira. It is kosher. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel V'Levi the Amri. This is check number one. So listen to the way you check. What's the concern? That maybe this weasel stuck its teeth into the skull, punctured the brain. So they all say, Machnes yad lifnim, you stick your finger inside to the top of its, what do you call that area on top?
Palate.
The palate, very good. Push.
Oh.
Push. What's going to happen? His brains are going to be mush, and they're going to push out. Now, if there's two little holes on the top, there's going to be brain squirt, and then you know that it's treif. No brain squirt, kosher, gewaldige way.
His brains are falling out.
Yeah. Listen, a chicken doesn't have that much brain going on, but whatever it is. If the brain comes out, treifa, if not, it's kosher. Says Gemara, according to Manoah, it says that it becomes treif when you puncture both membranes. Okay, so both are punctured now, because if you see brain squirting out of the top of this chicken's head, obviously both were punctured. If the upper membrane is punctured, that makes it a treifa. Maybe in this case, the lower one is not punctured. The reason why brain is not splattering everywhere is because there's another layer. Says Gemara, not true. Why? Because the lower layer is very, very thin. Since the lower membrane is very, very thin, so when a human being pushes his finger through the palate, it's going to give, and the brain is going to go squirting out. Let's just use this picture for the pshat of the Gemara. If brain came out of the top, that means what? There's 2 holes, or however many holes from the weasel. Omar Ziri ain bedika lechulda. Zir says you can't check from a weasel bite. Mipnei sheshinei dakus, because it has very thin, needle pointy teeth. Here, like, where was that? Here, right over here. They're too small to check. The Gemara says it makes no sense what you're saying. Why? Who cares? Brain will come out. Because its teeth are crooked. Therefore, when you put pressure, you apply pressure, it'll come out of the membrane and it won't continue into the, it's going to go into the empty airspace between the brain and the skull. It won't go out of the next hole. If it's lined up, hole to hole, then when you put pressure, it'll come out the top hole. But since it's on an angle, it's not going. So its tooth is crooked, and when you push the brain out, I would have put no, this is terrible. This is not a good picture. No. The skull has to be moved over to the left. Mark, just move it over to the left a little bit. You have what I'm saying? Over here, the whole lines up perfectly. Not good, not good. Oh, it actually has a video. Look at that. That's what he's showing. No. I learned it a little differently. Okay. Says the Gemara, so what does Zeiri say? That you cannot check a weasel. Says the Gemara, when Zeiri came to Nardar, Shalachlu, he sent back to where he came from, to Bavel. Well, Nardar is in Bavel. He sent back Dvarim shomarti lefneichem tos heim biyadi. This, which I said that you can't check a weasel bite, is a mistake. In fact, he said from Rish Lakish, you could check a weasel with your hand. What I meant is, not with a nail. What do? You take something sharp, like a nail or a pin, and you go back and forth on the brain. And you see if there's any holes in the membrane. If there's a snag, did I just say snag? So what's the problem with a masmer, with a nail? The problem is it can make another hole, it can make another nick, and it'll make it a treifa. No, you could use the nail trick to see whether or not there was a previous puncture. And this is an old machlokes of Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda and Nechemia. Chad badik b'yada, one would use the pushing of the brain up. Another one would use a pin. So the one that used this finger told the one that used the pin, when are you going to stop wasting Jewish money? And the same thing in the reverse. The one that used the needle test, you tell the one that used the finger test, what you're doing is not accurate. Just because the brain doesn't splatter everywhere, it doesn't come out of 2 holes, doesn't mean that it's not an avela. It is an avela. Now, what's the difference between an avela and a treifa, Rabbi Isai? An avela is a dead animal, like a cow. Any cow that dies without shechita, any horse that dies, any chicken that dies is an avela. It gives off a tumah. A treifa is an animal that you shecht, and you find out that it has a mum. How do you say mum in English?
A blemish.
A blemish that will cause it to die eventually. But because you shechted it, there's no tumah. So the Gemara asks right away, Vashchuti in the vela is Vashchuti. Why are you calling this a nevela? Yeah, it's a shachot. So shachot, why are you calling it a nevela? You're right. In fact, it's a treifa, not a nevela. Who said what? To stand the Rabbi Yehuda with the Badik Biyada, I have a simple raya. It's mamish mefurish. The Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that you do the hand check, not the needle check. The sanyo. You use the hand check and not a nail. Nishbar etzem, and he continues to say that if the skull broke, so it's a treifa. You don't need to puncture the membrane. To stime, great raya. That's Rabbi Yehuda that says it. Ask the Gemara, but I have a problem. You tell me you check the weasel with your hand, not with a nail. Alma Islay b'diku, so you could check. And then you tell me that if the skull breaks, you don't need to check to see if the membrane is intact or not. Automatically, it's a treif. The membrane is nothing. So you see, there's no point of checking. Says the Gemara, and we're going to have this 3 times in a row, same exact question, same exact answer. So we have a freebie here all the way to the bottom. Seifa asan la'oif shel mayim. When we're talking about a water bird, like a seagull, well, that's an example, but a duck, kosher bird, it doesn't have a membrane. And therefore, it's treif right away. If you have a problem, broken skull, it's treif right away. Ask the Gemara, how can you say that a brain? I mean, that's one of the chasadim Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave creatures and humans. The brain sits in fluid. It has all this protection with membrane and fluids. Imagine a brain without fluids. Every time you moved your head, the brain would get a concussion, brain banging into the wall of the skull. So how can you tell me it doesn't have a membrane? Says Gemara, of course it has a membrane. It's a very, very soft membrane. Here's a chicken membrane, and compared to a duck's membrane, it's much thicker chicken. You see the thick white over here. The membrane, yeah, there's a membrane. But the point is that even if the membrane is intact, but if there's a hole in the skull, the membrane is worthless because it's so thin. So there's no point in checking it. It's treif. So now the same thing all over again. You said that Shmuel, who said that you do the hand check. Our friend says Rav is the one that says you use the hand, not Shmuel. It's the same thing as we had before. If the skull breaks, you don't have to check the membrane. So how come by us you check the membrane? In a water bird, you don't have to check the membrane because it's all over. Once there's a hole in the skull, it's a treifa. Because it doesn't have a membrane. It doesn't have a. It has a very thin one. Says Gemara, third story. Same thing all over again. There was a chicken in Rav Chana's house. And he sent a question to Rav Masna that what? Our case where the skull broke but the membrane is intact. And he said it's kosher. Great. End of that. Now Rabbi Isai, all the way on the bottom of Amud Aleph, another few very interesting ways to check whether or not a weasel bit through and through the brain and the membrane. One way to check it is take a look at this. He checked it out in the sun. Rav Yemer Badek b'Maya. Look. Now, even this one right over here, how did you get a membrane that you could check in the sun? You have to remove the brain. How do you remove the brain? Do something like this. Here we go. And this is the water test. You fill up the head with water, the membrane with water, and you see if it comes out. If it comes out, that means it had a hole in the membrane. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Badik, he would check, another way to check. Daf Nun Vav Beis, Begila Dechitza. he would use wheat, the hairs of the wheat, he would go back and forth with it, and he would see if it falls into like a little crevice, a little hole, and then know that it's holy. Omer Rav Shizi, Hani Avazi Didan. Our ducks, they're like water birds. No, not for the Lord. If a chicken fell into the fire. How much green? As much as the hole in the different limbs. Every time we say there's a hole in the lungs or whatever, it's a needle. If you recall so if you see a red organ that turns a little green, it is treif. The Gemara, I'm just telling you the end of the Gemara, but here comes the Gemara. If a bird fell into fire and became green, kaved its liver keneged b'nei ma'ayimau. If the liver, that's opposite of the intestines, becomes green, what's the halacha? Amalei treifa. Why is it different than any other organ? So he asked him beautifully. It was a setup to the question. We know that if you remove the entire liver, as long as a small piece remains, the animal is kosher. The bird is kosher. Why? Because it will regenerate itself. So who cares if a little tiny part of the liver became green? It will regenerate itself. So, since it got green on the underside of the liver, you should know that eventually, not eventually, but that the intestines also were burnt and singed by this fire. It's like indication. Look, if the liver got burnt, not necessarily would the intestines get burnt, but if the liver got burnt to the point where they turned green and the intestines are right behind the liver, then you know that they got enough damage from that fire and it's treif. He had a chicken that fell into the fire. So he sent it to Rabbi Elazar Kaber. It's green. That's the normal color. But we said in the Mishnah that if it turns green, it's possible. So he says, three organs that are initially red, and they turn green. The change of the color indicates that it's treif. But if it's green to begin with, as the Gemara is going to say soon, then of course it's kosher. And we learned this also. These are the types, these are the organs that become treif, turning green. The kurkivon, how do you say kurkivon? The gizzard? Yes. The heart and the liver. You also had a chicken that fell into the fire. What's up with the chickens that fall into the fire? He said, oh, it's red. Red is good. When it changes colors, that's when it's treif. It's not that it's red. But what was it to begin with? It was green that turned to red. That's treif. But if it's red and it stayed red, that's great. When it's red and turns green, it's also treif. Which ones that remain kosher when they're red and they remain red, that are kosher? Those three that we said before, that if they turn green, they become treif. The heart, the kurkumin, and the kavod. If you have red organs that turn green, and you put them in boiling water, and the original color came back. Sheirim, why is it kosher? Because it only had smoke. You're seeing a smoke screen. You're not seeing the real color. So let's take that logic and let's use it in the reverse. If you have a red organ that didn't turn green, and then you boiled it up, you see, in fact, it was damaged by the fire. How do I know it was damaged by the fire? Because I boiled it and then it turned the green. It was supposed to be red, but it turned green. Treifa. My time, iglayu. Sorry, yeah. Adam shloiriku. Shlagam yiriku. Treifa. My time, iglayu basayu. So Rashi says the interesting word basayu means their shame. In other words, they were hiding behind the smoke, But in fact, it's very shameful. It turned colors, it switched colors. Amar Rav Ashi Hilkuch. So Rav Ashi comes with Allah, and the Gemara doesn't like what he says. If you think, you have concern that your animal might have jumped onto the grill for a minute, and you're not sure if it's a treifa, so put it into boiling water and see if anything changes colors. So the Gemara, we don't work like that. Since nothing changed colors, why would you look for a change in color by putting it into hot water? If you have a changed color, so you put it in. Or in the first case, you put it in and you found out that it changed. But to lechatchila go and check for a changed color, we don't do that.
Why assume?
Why assume? Dratzo utrafa b'kaisel. An animal that a human being stepped on or threw it into a wall. Omer Rebbe Lazar ben Atiglas Shum Rebbe Lazar b'Rebbe Yanai. Achazu b'achazu tzricha b'dika. You still need to check it. For what? Now, if it lived for 24 hours, we said it's kosher. Why is it kosher? Because what's the main concern? Risukei varim, that it's in a fula, that it has internal injuries, and this will give us an indication that it didn't have internal injuries because it wouldn't survive 24 hours. But you still have to check it to see if it has a severed spinal cord. That's what he says. Says the Mishnah. Just like we had in the beginning of the Perek, with the first Mishnah was Elu Treifos, then we had Elu Ksheris in Behemoths. So on Amad Aleph we have Elu Treifos on birds, and Elu Ksheris in birds. Here's the Elu Ksheris. Elu Ksheris Ba'if, Nikfa Hagargeres, if there's a little tiny hole in the trachea, the breathing tube, it is kosher. Oisha Nizdaka. So this is Nizdaka. We love this picture. Right down the trachea. So when the bird eats, it actually closes up. The tension closes it up, so it's easier for it to heal. Hikata chulda roisha, if the weasel bit it in its head, magam she'eno says it's treif, in a place where it won't become treif, not by the brain. Nikav azepek. So let's go to the zepek. Here we go.
Or by the brain and we checked.
No, it says magam she'eno says it's treif.
Right. Or by the brain.
You mean that it didn't go through the membrane? Zepek is the crop. It's the first sack that the food goes into. Rebbe Omer afilu nitel. So remember this, Rebbe. Rebbe says when it comes to the zepek, it can be removed completely. So they explain it doesn't mean completely. It means most of it, which is called completely. But remember, Rebbe says even if the whole zepek was removed, if the intestines came out but they weren't punctured, if its wings were broken, it's still kosher. It's not a treifa. Its feet are broken. Nimrutu knofeha, it lost its feathers, the large feathers. If you remove the down, the smaller feathers, psula. And they slept in night. If anybody did Chazarah yesterday's daf, you'll know what a tarpachas is. What's a tarpachas? The same thing what a shlafuchas is.
Same thing
as a
womb.
As a beis harechem. The Gemara said there's 3 lashonas for a rechem. I don't know, maybe I'm missing one. Akalpanim, if the womb was removed, they said the halacha is kirebi bezepek. Like Rebbe says zepek. Now what is the Rebbe saying zepek? Again, let's go back to the Mishnah. That when the crop is punctured, Rebbe says even if it was removed completely. So the Gemara says Ibaylu, what exactly do they mean by that? Did they actually mean that if the womb is missing, then it's asur, it's a treif? Kirebi bezepek le'teira? Like Rebbe says that if it's completely removed, the zepek is a heter. But tarpachas would be aser. Or they were just saying, look, just like Rebbe said it's mutter, so too the womb is mutter. The Gemara understood that there's something going on here by comparing it to Rebbe, they actually don't hold like Rebbe. So says the Gemara, in fact, I don't know what the pshat is. Omer Rabba, V'tem Rebbe Shimon ben Levi, Gagosh Zepek, Nidin Kiveshet. So let's take a look at this. And I'm going to bring my little laser. This is the crop right over here. So he says that the gagoy, this is the roof of the zepek, meaning where it becomes narrow. Nidan kiveshet. It has the same halacha as the esophagus. What's the halacha of the esophagus? That a small little puncture makes it treif. Heicha. Where is this exactly? Where it becomes narrow after the crop, right over here. All this right over here has halacha like an esophagus, and mashu makes it treif. Here comes the story of Rabbi Shmuel by Rabbi Yitzchak. When the intestines come out, they fell out. It's when the human being didn't intervene and put it back in upside down. If you put it in backwards, it makes it treif. Hu made you. How do you touch up the word by in
Established you.
and establish you? Akash Baruch Hu made like a base in a human. If any of them are flipped upside down, a person can't live. So don't mess around with Akash Baruch Hu's creation. Don't try to put it back in. If you do, you try to throw the kishkis back in. It's like a whole, it's a windy thing. If you try to put it back in, you're going to mess it up, and it's going to be a treifa. Tanya, and very similarly, this is referring to Klal Yisrael, to Knesset Yisrael, that what? Karcha de Koile Bey. It's like a city that has everything in it. Mimenu Kohanov, you have the Kohanim from them, Mimenu Nevi'ov, Nevi'im, Mimenu Sarov, Mimenu Malachov, King, Shenemar, Mimenu Pino, Mimenu Yosei. From everything, you have the corner, you have the Yosei, I say Yosei, the
Foundation?
no. It's like what you put in for a tent, like
Peg.
with the yal, a peg, thank you. Oh, here's the story of Boise. Here it is. Oh, crazy story. There was a Roman. He witnessed a terrible thing where a human being fell off a roof onto the ground. And his stomach exploded. And his intestines splattered out. We, in fact, have a picture that we took in the safari. It's a gross picture, so I'm warning you. Graphic warning. This is a zebra that, let me get this off, that someone attacked it or something happened there, and its intestines came out of it. He witnessed this. He sees it with a human being, that his kishkas are all over the place. I celebrate. So he takes the wounded man's son, he shechted him, he sliced his neck right in front of the father. So what did the father do? From such pain, watching his son like that, he screamed out and he made some noise or whatever, and his kishkis went all the way back in, but it was ba'achuzah sinayim raboisai. The guy didn't know. He thought his son died. It was a shchita. But in fact, it was a magic trick. Ingid ve'idnach, he screamed out. Ingid ve'idnach, ulemayone. So his kishkis went right back to where he came in like a vacuum. V'chayti l'kreisei, and he sewed him up real quickly so they shouldn't go back out. And the guy lived happily ever after in Rome. Rabboisai, have a wonderful day.
Merit the schus of spreading Torah throughout the world. Sponsor a shir today. MDYsponsor.com or sponsor at MDY.com.